because it's very brief, it's 3 minutes, is play it on Kim's iPad, and so that
We might have the equipment. Hang on.
we might have the equipment to do that? Because okay.
You emailed it? Yeah.
It's sort of implied, and some of us have mentioned Skyhorse Publishing. All the books up here have been put out by Skyhorse Publishing. And my co-author on vaccine injuries is Tony Lyons, and he's the founder and CEO of Skyhorse Publishing. You know, the commitment it takes to do books like this, there are people here who've tried to get books done before with other publishers. And, oh my God, look at this.
We're going to get it on Mark's computer.
We're going to get it on Mark's, you know. There was so
Make
much
it
going
happen.
on today, I didn't want to stress you out with trying to.
Oh, lost books. No,
And, yeah, I know. So I should have had a little more faith. I didn't check behind the curtain. This is actually sort of amazing.
This will be much easier to see than an iPad.
Absolutely. So
Like the
this,
great and powerful eye.
Okay.
is really a unique commitment to publishing books like this when other publishers, frankly, wouldn't. And that's just the cold, hard truth. Tony Lyons has an affected child. He's going to talk about that in this video. How many of you grew up reading sports books and hunting and fishing books and stuff like that? And I grew up reading books by the Lyons Press. Well, that was Tony's dad, Nick Lyons, who had the old Lyons Press, and it was all about hunting and fishing and those sorts of books back in the day. And so Tony is really coming from a family tradition of publishing. And he started this company in 2006, and it's been described as the fastest growing publisher and a New York City success story, one of the fastest growing publishers in the industry. So are we ready to roll this? Mark Blaxel has been abducted.
That for every single delay in getting our book out, my mother said I'll die before we ever see that story, and I was so sure they would pay him more not to publish it, that they being the evil behind everything. And Kent's like, no, these guys will get it done. They have integrity. So I didn't believe him, but and now I see it here. I never did get my 3 free copies, though.
We'll make sure
We'll
they
get
have-
you 3 copies.
We got a few cases.
I don't want to carry them home. I never check a bag on a plane. Never know what'll disappear.
I wouldn't hold our breaths yet.
Excuse me.
Is there a network I could sign into instead of my hotspot?
Oh, here we
Something's
go.
about to start.
Go out to the University of Minnesota, sign as guest through their Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That might be a better connection. This hotspot is not great for video.
It's looking good.
And then I'm guessing it's up here? No, it's spinning.
The one here is as well.
Keep it. What do you look for?
Okay, here's my question. I think we expect and hope that more and more parents will start to reconsider vaccinating. Vaccination rates will drop, exemption rates will rise, and then probably the government will try to crack down even more than they are now on restricting exemptions and requiring vaccines. And have you guys envisioned this kind of scenario and thought about what are good strategies to to employ when that happens, or even now in preparation.
Who wants to take that?
I'll lead it off a little bit, but I'm going to kind of change a few parts of your question, Jerry. I'm going to kind of relate it to the current measles outbreak that we're witnessing right now. And to answer your question, I believe that the measles outbreak is really a function of our government trying to create a vigilante environment. General populace doesn't understand what's happening and the issues regarding vaccination. And so what I think is happening is that you see a complete failure on their previous attempts to show that vaccines are safe when we know that not all of them are. Now that they're trying to use the measles outbreak as a way to divide our nation and create a vigilante type environment and try to turn those who are questioning vaccines or promoting vaccine safety and research, saying that we're the bad guys. And I think that's why they're upping the game. This is only the first part, because I also believe that there's a major announcement coming shortly on the CDC mumps whistleblower case. There's another part of a decision will be handed down, and they're trying to get out in front and try to taint the well, if you will, of public opinion.
And if I can weigh in on that, I love history, so I want to see how systems change over time. And when tyrannical systems are under attack, they try to fight back, and it's usually when they start losing control. So I actually welcome the vigilantism, because what happens is that the American experience is that there's one side and then there's another. They have attacked us by using this thing called false balance. Oh, we don't want to give, any credence to this side, which is what's happened to us. Well, the more things like this happen, the more there's going to be a call for people like us to respond publicly. They're going to demand that they hear our side of it. Now, what's really interesting is the CDC knows that vaccine compliance is going down. Among which groups is it going down? It's going down among the very poor and the very wealthy and well-educated. So if I'm the government and I'm deciding who do I want to go after, I want to attack the well-educated and the very wealthy, that doesn't seem like a good long-term strategy to me. It seems like a strategy that's designed to fail. So, as far as I'm concerned, I want the government to wail as much as they can, as much as they want to, because if I got the well-educated and the wealthy on my side, hey, I'm thinking I got a pretty good army behind me.
Sorry. I just first want to say that I'm against our current vaccines that we have, but I don't know what vaccines would look like if there were a healthier or natural alternative. So, are there vaccines available that are pure and natural for the fatal diseases that we have vaccines for currently? And if so, why aren't they being used? And would there be any benefit to using them as an alternative to what we have now?
I can say the technology's out there. I was just asked to go consult with a company, a small biotech company, who looked at the work and said, how can we make it safe? How can we do it better? The technology's out there. It's not until there's some incentive. This little company can't fight against Monsanto, Merck, Abbott. They go out of business. They don't get the grants. So they won't get small business SBIRs. So unless private people fund them to do it, it won't get done. The technology exists. and we could do it right, and we could do it safer.
So it's all about the money.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a local friend, Kate Birch, who practices homeopathy, who wanted to remark on this.
Hi. So I think at the origin of the vaccine problem, the theory is correct. And your question is a very good question because it's about the methodology that's flawed with the multiple diseases, all the adjuvants, all the preservatives, all the other substances in it. If we take it back to the idea that we want to educate the immune system about an infectious process so that the immune system learns without suffering through that process, then you're actually building immunity. And as a homeopath, I can say that we have what are called homeopathic nosodes, and they're pure disease agents that have been diluted. The attenuation method is through the homeopathic potentization, and you just get the pure information of the disease without all of the other trappings that the vaccines have. So that is one alternative that already exists.
Thank you, Kate.
And you don't have an immune system when you're 24 hours old. That's why you need your moms. That's why you need, we don't know what an immune system of a 3-month-old looks like. We have no idea. I've been an immunologist 30 years. We never looked. And yet we can hand 3 antigens of 3 totally different looking pathogens to a very immature, and then what does it do? It goes on tilt like your iPhone when it just does this. And that's what happens then for the rest of their life. It's incredible to me.
You can go to the Centers for Disease Control's website, and they have something called the Pink Book, which lists all the ingredients that are in every vaccine, so you can actually see what's in each vaccine.
Without doubt, I think vaccines cause autism, and without doubt, I think GMOs, geoengineering, fluoride, fracking, et cetera, cause autism. How do you think it's best to connect these diverse causes of autism using science and relating to our, in quotation marks, our government, thinking and focus?
I don't think it's a question of wondering what new thing we have to do. I think it's going back to the tenets of science. I mean, when in putting Judy's book together, I just thought to myself, good Lord, this is not complicated. This is the basic science that every kid in America learns how to do an experiment. If you're testing something, you change one thing at a time to see if that changes the result. The problem is we have lost sight of the basic scientific process, and we're losing sight of it because if we did actual science, it would affect the financial interest of major companies.
And the scientists, Mark said 2 Merck scientists were forced to falsify data. I'm sorry. Nobody's forced. You go to jail. You get killed if you have to, but you don't do it.
That is why I love this woman. That is the courage. That is the courage of a true scientist. A true scientist never says, "I was forced to change my research." The scientist says, it's like the old vows we take.
In defense of the people, of the whistleblowers themselves, I misspoke. They were asked to falsify data. They refused, and they were removed from the lab, and people were brought in that were willing to falsify. They did not raise the alarm because they were afraid, and it took them a while to actually get to the point where
there
they
are
were.
a lot of cowards out there
Yeah.
in my story. They're usually not women. So this must be something about that Y chromosome.
In defense of men, there are 2 whistleblowers, 1 male, 1 female.
Well, but the scientists, the women scientists that got hurt, Elaine DeFreitas Mead, 20 years later, who described these things. And only the women got hurt. Just notice that. And the virus isolated in prostate cancer. Do you see anybody attacking a prostate cancer patient? No.
I just have a little statistic before my actual question here. 2 parts per billion mercury is the mandated limit in drinking water. A regular flu shot has upwards of 50,000 parts per billion mercury present. So how is it legally possible for pharma companies to sell a product with that high of a mercury content and market it as safe?
They would tell us that is an unscientific question. We can't count, apparently. Yeah, exactly. It is absolute idiocy that they can have one standard for drinking water and they can have another standard for what gets injected into your blood veins.
So that's all it is. It's just 2 different standards that separate.
Wouldn't it make
It'd be a
more...
good project, because this is a point that I think Mike Wagnitz has made pretty consistently, is that, you know, if you get to the end of flu season and your local CVS, which has been, you know, actively dispensing flu shots with no follow-up or no doctor, no nothing, but they've got a supply of mercury-containing flu shots. When the flu season is over and they're past and they've got excess inventory, it's a hazardous waste disposal problem with that level of toxicity. You know, I don't think I've ever heard anywhere someone reporting on what actually they do, and do they get away with it? Is there some special procedure, or, you know, or is there an expose waiting to happen? That would be a nice little investigative project for someone kind of with an entrepreneurial mindset. Because I'd love to know, and it is a hazardous waste. That they'll inject it into you, but it is a hazardous waste upon disposal by definition.
I recall a few years ago in Yorktown, in Westchester County where I live, that mercury thermometer broke in the school, and the school was evacuated, and guys in biocontainment suits come in, and this ends up on the local television channel. And the dichotomy of them saying it's okay to inject that into infants, I find troubling. To Dr. Judy's point, there is something here about women who stand up, and one of the really good things that I learned while pulling together vaccine injuries is the story of a woman by the name of Bernice Eddy, who is the person who found out that the polio vaccine, the original vaccine, was forced out too quickly, and that they were, in fact, was contaminated with live polio virus. She told her boss, William Seabrell, at the federal NIH headquarters, that the vaccine was contaminated, and she showed him pictures of the monkeys who had died from polio. And he threw those pictures in the garbage, and the vaccine went out, and in short order there was something called the Qatar crisis, or the Qatar incident. And what occurred there was that this scientist, a woman, stood up, told her bosses what was going on, and they didn't listen. Now, the difference, and for this she was transferred. She did pay a price. She was transferred, and she was put in the place where they believed nothing could ever be found out, and that was cancer research. Sorry about that. Where she then also found out that SV40, simian virus 40, was yet another vaccine contaminant. There is actually, and these were federal employees who, working through the systems in place at the time, were able to get the word out. Yes, they did pay a price. She did pay a price. And yet she is now noted as being a hero. And that's a name that we should be talking about more regularly, is Bernice Eddy.
The good government scientists, the scientists who are there, who we need to convince, if they know something and they haven't revealed it, this is the time to come out. This is the time to come clean. Think about the legacy that you are leaving to your country, your world, and your children. This is how important this is, and there can be no hiding the truth or shading the truth.
You know, this leads me to a question that someone asked me to pose on their behalf, which is about the whistleblower William Thompson. They ask why was their data sort of extracted only for African American boys as a subgroup, and also what is the update on all that? People know the William Thompson story, I think, right? So I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, it's the same thing they did to chronic fatigue syndrome for 25 or 30 years. They just consent the wrong people into the study. So when they found out there was a little problem with the blacks, I think is the way he wrote it in his notebook, what are we going to do about the problem with the blacks? And so, that disappeared because they used some ridiculous statistics, and they took anybody without a Atlanta birth certificate out of the study. What's that got to do with it? In the Lipkin study, in saying there was no XMRV in CFS, I had patients call me and say, I can't be in the study because I live more than 50 miles from Miami, or I can't be in the study because I have the very disease they're looking at. So they play games. Oh, and at the end of it, when Tony Fauci said, let's end this farce and get rid of that fraud and that criminal, the study was designed blinded so that we would get 2 samples all mixed up for more than 300, 400 samples, and we do all of our testing on those. And if we found 1 of 2 positive, we would get the 3rd to break the tie. We found a lot of 1 of 2 positives, and we didn't get to break that tie. And they wrote the paper as if the positives were not positive. They stuck it in the supplemental materials. And then they used the ridiculous teacup statistics. Anybody know what those are? Well, it appears that if you can tell if you pour tea into milk rather than milk into tea. And I said to Frank, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? There are lies, damn lies, and statistics is what Frank taught me when he taught me how to do science. I never used statistics in my life. You either have a virus or you don't. You either cure a disease or you don't.
If I could comment on that a second. I actually went back and looked at the birth certificate issue in the case involving Thompson's paper. And what the paper says is that they needed the birth weight data from the birth certificates, and that was an important part of the study. The problem there, I've rounded up a few old birth certificates. I had to go back like 40 years in Georgia to get to the point at which they actually did have birth weight data on the birth certificates. So that was a total lie. And as everyone in Georgia knows, who speaks like I do, slowly, birth certificates in Georgia and throughout the South are used to exclude black voters. That's why that happened.
In terms of the current status of that, the Thompson claims, I think that Posey's office, Congressman Posey, has 500,000 documents that they're sorting through and hopefully will result in some public discussion. Is that fair to say? It ain't over by a long shot.
Well, if those documents are destroyed, let's release the permanent injunction and show everything that was taken out of my office if they still exist. And show it. They told Frank Rossetti. I will say Frank has courage. We'll give guys one. But they told him when he left the federal government, when he was forced to retire last July, another reason why we delayed the book, because he wasn't talking until that check dropped in his in the can. But they told him not to take anything. And they made him autoclave all the samples out of his lab. Don't take any of the papers, any of the notes that had anything to do with the XMRV study. He could have the rest of his career, but he couldn't have that. Well, he moved down and he lives a block or 2 from me, and he said, Judy, I don't know where this stuff came from, and threw this box of everything on my porch. Frank Rossetti didn't throw away anything for 40-some years. And I scanned every bit of it into hard drives and dispersed it around the world, so we'll get them.
I have a question, and I already gave Kim a hint about what this is about. Kim Rosenberg. I see vaccination to vaccinate or to not vaccinate, excuse me, as a human rights issue that should be at the international level for peoples of the world to examine all the data from all the countries in an honest way and decide whether or not they're going to allow people to refuse to vaccinate if that is their choice. It's a basic human right. That's it.
No, you're absolutely right. We did talk. Is this working?
Yeah.
Just
You've got to lean close.
So we did talk about this earlier, and I agree with you that it is a basic human right. I think there are organizations out there that are using vaccines in third world countries for their own purposes and not necessarily for the health and well-being of children. I also think that we need to look closely at, for example, with respect to HPV vaccines, there are lawsuits in Japan, India, France, and Spain relating to injuries from those. We need to follow those. I think there's a lot of research to be done on an international level. Informed consent is an international concept that should be applied in medicine, and it's not applied with respect to vaccination. We've done some research into how other countries vaccinate and what their policies look like, whether or not they have compensation programs and how those compensation programs function, and we're going to be continuing to do that research. I do think it's an area that's really important to follow up on.
Hi there. I'm a young mom, and I anticipated having a hard time finding a doctor that would treat my daughter not being vaccinated, and left plenty of pediatrician offices in tears. I've had pediatricians tell me that they get paid, their raises are based off the number of kids they vaccinate. But what I'm wondering is, why are there not more doctors questioning? I know that there's a lot of money in it, but it seems like it's more at the pharmaceutical level. Why aren't there more just pediatricians and things that maybe aren't getting quite as much? Where are the ethics? Why aren't people standing up for what's right, or at least questioning?
It's a really good question, and sadly, the vaccine industry has grown explosively with the removal of liability or of liability exposure, and it's now a $25 billion growth industry. It's one of the bright spots inside the pharmaceutical companies who are struggling with a lot of patent expiration issues, and vaccines have a much rosier future in the business eyes of the companies, and they put a lot of money into it. The pediatricians are often wonderful people, and some of them are progressive. The profession in its totality, it's a little bit like you can like the Major League Baseball players, but not like the way their union head negotiates when you get into a contract period. The American Academy of Pediatrics is the union. It's the professional trade group that represents pediatricians. They're influential in setting policy. They inexorably pursue their economic self-interest of the group, and the economic interest of pediatricians is more money from insurance companies in easily compensated procedures. The well baby visit is the classic one of those, and so they defend that, and they're already not liable due to the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, but if they want to run a successful commercial practice, and not have to deal with the complexity of a truly sick child who might be sick from something that they don't understand or might take time to figure out. The way to run kids in and out of the office quickly with lower cost nurses to do the labor and to get paid easily is with a well baby visit. So the whole system is set up to grease the skids for frequent and excessive vaccination.
And I'd like to add on to that a little bit. Kind of what I see as psychological piece of this. I'm a teacher, so I've got 200 kids a day who are vying for my attention, who all want to be the smart kids, who all want to do well. And I keep thinking of those people who become doctors are like the good students, okay? They get lots of pats on the head all through their education for being smart. It's a wonderful thing, but it breeds a certain kind of approach to authority, which is they are always psychologically looking for approval from authority. And so I think what that breeds in them is they get this tunnel vision for what they think of as true and what they think of as false. So you have these good little obedient doctors, and I don't mean to downplay. They're very intellectual, but a brain is only useful if you use it the right way. And I think that they are conditioned not to listen to people like us. And they know, they listen to the AMA, they listen to the Academy of American Pediatrics, and anything else that isn't vetted by them, it doesn't get through their filter. And so, in addition to the money, which is very true and everything, I just think that psychologically, we are breeding an entire generation of doctors who will not question those in charge.
I think another piece to that, too, is that a significant portion of doctors' knowledge about drugs and procedures comes from the pharmaceutical industry. The pharma reps are in their offices all the time, and that's where they learn about things.
And Kent, I can bring it. He's using the they in a general term, but I'm going to remind him of a funny story when he was writing the book. So he did this by interviewing a bunch of people, unbeknownst to me, and one that he was a little worried about was a full professor at Cornell. And he asked her a number of questions, and within about 10 minutes of when he talked to her, he called me and he said, "Oh my God, remember what she said?" You asked her.
Your memory is far better than mine.
You said, "Did you find evidence of these viruses in your studies?" "Yes, I did." What do you attribute that to? "Oh, it has to be contaminated reagents." "Well, you're a good scientist. Did you test those reagents?" "Absolutely, we did." "Did you find any contamination?" "No, we did not." So, what is your conclusion? Had to be contamination.
See, I'm used to.
And he called me up and he said,
I'm used to.
"Welcome to my hell."
I'm used to questioning sixth graders, okay? And so when I've got a scientist from Cornell and she said, "Oh, my research is contamination." "Oh, did you find those reagents which were contaminated?" "No, I didn't." "Okay, then why do you think it's contamination?" "Well, that's what everybody else said." You would fail my class.
Ken, I think it's really, Ken, it's a really good point about the acculturation of people that want to become medical doctors. Yeah. Another factor economically is they also tend to be risk averse. They're the ones who go through the very approved paths in very systematic ways. And as you get out into the big bad world and you're a doctor, one of your risks is to be sued for something bad that happens to a patient. And the one way to avoid that risk is to always follow the standard of care, whatever that is. And so if you don't vaccinate, you're at more risk if you're a doctor than if you do very aggressively. So their economic interest is also some CYA. In addition to the cultural and economic effects.
And I think, Mark, that's probably actually going to become a bigger issue as more and more healthcare records are computerized and information is centralized, and they'll be able to figure out those doctors who aren't vaccinating.
If I could just comment on the scientific community, the situation there, a good example, a reporter from New York was interested in my book and the issue of scientists fabricating data, unwilling to publish the truth, etc. She came back to me later, having gone out and surveyed graduate students, professors, you name it, and she said she couldn't find one of them that would say that they have ever fabricated any data or not published any data that they had. And I said, well, you asked the wrong question. Just ask them what would happen if, working for the CDC, they publish data that question the CDC policy, work for EPA and question the CDC policy. I said, they will all tell you what will happen. They will either be fired or deaded in their position. Everybody who works as a scientist for the government knows that if they've worked very long. That's what happened to me. I was defunded, transferred to the University of Georgia, and my career was ended. So I keep hearing this again and again. Why don't we open the door for scientists who work with Thompson and others at the CDC to come out and do this? You're talking about a system of federal employment that's been going on for 30 years, where in the last 15 to 20 years, the government has worked very hard from the top down to screen out scientists who will question government policies. There's been an evolution in civil service to where we are now, that what you have left there are the scientists who remain after people like me have been screened out. So it's hopeless to expect, in my opinion, other than on very rare events, for somebody to do what William Thompson has done, and he only did it when he was outed.
And you know, David, it's really interesting. They did a survey at one of the federal prisons, and they asked them if they had ever committed a crime there. And nobody in prison actually had committed a crime. So it's a little biased there.
Both the CDC and the EPA have been through major purges. At the CDC, Julie Gerberdine was in charge of it. She shifted the focus of the CDC from science to what she called communications. It was just PR. 5 former CDC directors wrote her a letter and said, you're threatening public health. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran in one issue. I mean, they covered it for months in 2006, but in one issue, they simply posted the pictures of all the scientists at the CDC who had left. And it took, I mean, it must have been 50 in that one issue. The same thing happened at the CDC under Carol Browner in 1993, 94. We have a shell of scientists now at the CDC and the EPA, and they are not our, by and large, good and honest scientists who were gotten rid of or left.
And it's no different in Big Pharma. 1986, 87, I worked for the Upjohn Company in Kalamazoo, and I was testing the biological effects of bovine growth hormone on human cells and whatever else in our systems. And I had lots of data, and my boss said, you are morally, ethically, and legally responsible to do exactly as I tell you, and cover up these data. And I took that notebook like a Frisbee, and I pitched it over his head, and he ducked. And
I love this woman.
The bulletin board fell down, and they marched me on down to the personnel director. And he liked me because we play soccer, and he knows that I fight. So he said, Judy, you can't throw things at your boss. And I said, he's a bleeping idiot. And he said, I know. So he said, how are we going to fix this? I said, that's okay. I have to go back to graduate school because my stepfather just got diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer, and his kids already lost their mother and their stepmother. We didn't want him to know, but of course it's in the book. He died. But at any rate, so I think insolence and insubordination was probably what it said in my file at Upjohn.
CDC, military, from the top down, military?
Quasi. They like to wear little epaulets.
Before your question, we're running, we probably only have about 15 more minutes, and I have 3 people. Okay, I see a 4. So let's try to go a little faster because we'll get kicked out.
2 quick questions. First one, Has the, well, I'll start with this one because it's the easier one. How do vaccination rates, therefore disease rates, compare from the U.S. to other developed countries? That's the harder question. And the easier one is, has the funding of science been also true on the state level? Somebody had mentioned that the federal government's funding of science stuff at the university level, et cetera, is that also been true on the state levels as well, to the degree anybody can answer that?
Absolutely, in all my experience. It is the federal government controlling all of the universities. Grants were supposed to just be part of it. Now it's everything. Indirect cost on a grant is as much as 100%, meaning they pay to turn on the light of the university.
Right, okay. And how about the first question about vaccination rates and disease rates in the U.S. compared to other industrialized countries?
It's a little bit of comparing apples and oranges because different countries vaccinate on different schedules. They have different vaccines. We're the most highly scheduled country with regard to the number of vaccines. Other developed countries give fewer vaccines in their schedule, so they're compliant. I don't know what their compliance rates are, but the compliance rates for a smaller schedule are not going to have the same meaning as the compliance rates for a larger schedule, if that makes sense. You're not looking at everyone who's vaccinating the same in all these countries and comparing that rate.
But you're asking if there's more disease in countries with less vaccine. I don't think so. I mean, obviously England doesn't have a chickenpox vaccine, so they probably have more chickenpox. Yeah. But I think that I'm not aware of first world countries.
Infant mortality, we are terrible.
Yeah, we're terrible in infant mortality. They do. I think that they don't require the mumps vaccine in Japan, and there is more mumps in Japan.
That makes sense.
Than there is here, but mumps, as Mark talked about earlier, as a childhood disease isn't necessarily a terrible thing. Mumps as an adult is a different issue. So, you'd have to also look at when those people in Japan who were not vaccinated are contracting the mumps.
This question is for Wayne. In our country, we have a Constitution guaranteed a trial by judge and jury. However, this kangaroo court called Vaccine Court has a politically appointed judge who plays judge and jury. How is this allowed to continue?
How many minutes do I have? The question is that basically we're talking about the Seventh Amendment, and where you have the right for judge and jury amongst your peers. There has been a very strong argument made that this court process, the MVICP, might be an unconstitutional movement. That has yet to take traction in any type of a court system or a debate in Congress. Now, Congress passed the act to establish the program. But it did allow at the beginning, if you did not like the outcome prior to a dismissal, you could exit the program at 240 days or even up to at 420 days, Mark. These days, you can't even do that because of the Supreme Court ruling of Brusewitz versus Watt Labs that came out in February 2011. So there is some people that feel that there is a strong argument to be made that it is an anti-constitutional or Seventh Amendment issue. I don't see that having too many supporters in Congress or in the federal court system to change that right now at this time.
Hi. I want to first thank you all for being here. This is great. And for this lady down here, you should probably try New Kingdom Pediatrics in Eden Prairie. My question is, I found that on Dun & Bradstreet, the Centers for Disease Creation and Proliferation is a private, not-for-profit corporation. Do you guys have any idea if this is actually true or not? Because I know a lot of things you can't believe, but that's what I found. I found other information that says that it is a private, for-profit corporation. But one of their biggest donors is the Department of Defense and, of course, Big Agri and Big Pharma. They seem to contract with the federal government to write policy for vaccines and surgical procedures and other prescription drugs. Am I pretty accurate there?
There is a CDC Foundation, which might be, it's a separate organization, and it does take donations from people like Bernie Marcus, and who's a major donor to Autism Speaks. There are often nonprofits that are funded by pharma and other interests that are friends of various government agencies. I know, for example, the CDC organization that oversees the autism issues, the National Center on Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities, that's a mouthful, NCBDDD. There is a Friends of NCBDDD, and that's, I think, a foundation or a nonprofit type structure. And they try to be friendly to that organization, support them, obviously influence them, and I think pharma companies are major donors to that. Is that responsive to your question, or?
Well, it looked to me like the CDC itself, as an organization, is a private corporation.
No.
There are within the health agencies for-profit type activities. One thing that goes on inside NIH, National Institutes of Health, is that they do research and they apply for patent protection on some of the inventions that come out of the research. For example, Gardasil, some of the major patent owners for Gardasil are NIH. The inventors are NIH employees, and the owner of the patents are NIH. And when Merck sells Gardasil vaccines, they send money back to NIH as a license fee. So it's a little profit center inside the agency. I don't know if CDC has anything quite on that scale, but there are technology transfer research organizations that do make money and do generate money for these agencies. I don't think, strictly speaking, they're for-profit as an S Corp or a C Corp or anything like that.
That's sort of how I came across this, because I found that they had a patent on the parts of the Ebola virus, a co-patent.
Yeah. No, these agencies are active patenters, and if it ever gets into a product, they will share in the revenue. That's a very common practice, which creates enormous conflict of interest. In the case of Gardasil, Dan and I wrote about Gardasil. It's in Kim's book, and NIH, the whole Health and Human Service Department, they invent the vaccine, they approve it in FDA, they recommend it in CDC, and they judge whether or not there are any injuries in HRSA, and they have their lawyers over in DOJ. So it's an entirely self-contained approval process, and if there's a problem with a vaccine like Gardasil, who inside HHS is going to stand up and say, no, we need to stop this? So it's very, and then they have their manufacturing partner, Merck, on the outside, and then when Julie Gerberding leaves CDC, she goes and becomes the president of the Merck vaccine division. So it's, whether or not it's a individual for-profit corporation, its behavior is certainly like that.
One of the interesting little discoveries that I made is something called, looking at this group that calls itself vaccinology. See, that's a term that many of us don't really have in our common parlance right now. Is this group refers to itself as the field of vaccinology. And they don't feel that they ought to be really monitored by anyone else except other people within vaccinology. And so there's this built-in reward system. And it gets a little absurd. It's not a secret group. I don't want to make this out to be the Templars or anything like that. There's a group called the Vaccine Dinner Club. Mm-hmm. And they are funded by Emory and by the CDC and by state health money and then pharma money. And what it is the Vaccine Dinner Club gets together, I think, on a quarterly basis. Yeah. And they eat. And while they're eating, they get a lecture on the latest and best news in the field of vaccinology. And the woman who runs it, she carries the title of goddess, which I thought was interesting. Now, you know, we come from a tradition where John Adams caught a world of trouble back in the day for suggesting that the President of the United States be referred to as Your Excellency. And yet, this group, Vaccinology, feels nothing at all ashamed of referring to themselves as goddesses. Now, I understand that it's tongue-in-cheek and all the rest of it, but there's this feedback loop. There's the National Foundation for Infectious Diseases, and they roll people out like Paul Offit, and they honor them. And they have Seth Mnookin, who wrote that wonderful book, whose reviews we're going to pass by March.
Yes, March 1.
And all the rest of it. And they have these folks teaching this course in vaccinology. And I just question whether the issue of adverse events is ever on the menu. And that's part of the problem here. You know, there's an old saying in martial arts that is, for a person who believes that all the world's problems are nails, the only solution is a hammer. Right? And that is what we have here. What we have is a breakdown of a system that has become incapable of listening, which is why we have to write books.
Okay, 2 more questions now. We should probably I guess that my question has to do with the whole 1 in a million statistic that they like to throw out that doesn't have any actual statistics attached to it. But I administrate a Facebook group that has grown to over 6,500 people in about 6 months, and over half of them have vaccine-injured children. What do they do next? Now that they know that vaccines are bad, what should they do? What help can they get? Where do they report it so that the statistics are more accurate, and where do they get help?
Well, this is not something that I say with a great deal of passion for, but obviously the vaccine adverse event reporting system is where there are times I really don't want to be at this microphone. That is the system within the United States for reporting vaccine adverse events. The only place that you can file for redress of injury is the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. As pointed out by Wayne and Brucewitz versus Wyeth, there is no other redress. Now, I do think that ultimately there's going to come a time when a critical mass is hit. I don't know what that will look like, but I do know that once upon a time there was something called the Berlin Wall, and it stood for a number of years. And then one day it came down. So I do know that there's going to come a time when that threshold is hit. All right? I think as many people as who can ought to file their cases in the only address that is available. That is the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. I know what that's telling people to get into. And one of the things that I'm really appreciative of is that I didn't figure all this out until after my statute of limitation on my guys was done. Because I didn't have to go through what the people have to go through dealing with that program. There are massive problems there. Expert witnesses are abused. Parents are often dragged through the mud. It's a train wreck. It's an abomination of American justice. It's also all that we have. And we have a tradition of reforming systems. So I hope that we can do this here. And that's the best I can tell you. I wish I had better news.
And I think Wayne had mentioned this when he spoke, but it is the only system right now in place. It also has a 3-year statute of limitations. There's no discovery rule. So it's when the discovery rule would say, you have until when you knew, the statute of limitations doesn't begin to run until you knew or should have known of the link between your injury and the causative factor. It also doesn't toll until adulthood, the way certain claims do, so that minors don't have to bring claims to adulthood. So you're really stuck with that 3 years from the date of vaccination. It's also a difficult system because there's really little or no discovery available to claimants in the system. And you're suing the government, you're not suing the vaccine manufacturer. So it's difficult to get any information that might help you demonstrate your case.
Last question. My question kind of has to relate with like allergies, food allergies in particular. Kind of trying to wade through all of the ingredients listed in the vaccines and the different manufacturers. I came across some things like yeast and egg protein amongst other really strange ingredients. Has anybody done any research or could point me in the right direction? It seems like if you're injecting something hoping to elicit an immune response, other things on board in the vaccination would also maybe trigger an immune response, triggering food allergies, or am I way off in my thinking?
Not way off, and I think Mark talked about that, in how the Gardasil vaccine was. There are lots of things in here that your immune system could be responding to, like pieces and parts of other viruses and things like that. Little VLPs, virus-like particles. That's part of the problem, the immune system on tilt.
Yeah, what you're saying is a part of this huge puzzle that we're trying to unravel. I think the addition of those products that you talked about is questionable. I don't think they've been adequately studied. We think that the fact that you are injecting those particles into immune systems, which are probably immature, makes complete sense why the body may then have a misguided response. That's what an allergy is.
I don't think there's almost certainly not much good research connecting vaccination risk with specific food allergies and drawing a close link. There's almost certainly not an acknowledgement that that's an issue. Things like peanut allergies are obviously, expanding greatly. There is virtually no mainstream science exploration of that possible connection, but there's a wonderful book called The History of the Peanut Allergy Epidemic, which is quite interesting, which only points to the reality that it's complicated. And I'm sure Judy would be able to wax eloquent on how complicated the immune system can be. The notion that all we know is that there is this massive intervention in the developing immune system that's expanded in the last few decades. We know there's an expansion in food sensitivities and allergies of all kinds. Some are anaphylactic shock, some are sensitivities, intolerances, some are different parts of the immune system might be responding in different kinds of ways to different kinds of foods and may react to different stimuli in different ways in different people. So the logical mind wants to say, oh, if I do this, then I'm putting my child at risk for this. It's so non-specific, and it can be even temporally bizarre. I mean, my oldest daughter, who is typically developing and wonderful, and we didn't think that there was anything, that she had any immune issues whatsoever, and she didn't really want to tell us when she was a teenager that she was having GI issues, and it wasn't until she got into college where she started experimenting and learning what kinds of food sensitivities she really had, and tracing that back to whatever. She had a less intensive vaccination program. She was born in 1991. She didn't have the same exposure as her sister did, who was born in 1995. But it's a blob of stuff, this really complex system that's mediating it all, and then there's the outcomes whenever they occur. And that's probably an unsatisfying explanation, but that's the way I think about it. And Judy, you could probably be more specific, but I don't know.
Well, you said it very simply earlier. The gut microbiome. Anybody, when I first started doing the studies, mom's got inflammatory bowel disease. No, we don't vaccinate kids if mom's already got a leaky gut and an immune problem. Look at the whole family before you see if you're susceptible. Because if you're susceptible, then you're like an AIDS baby, and you shouldn't be vaccinated on the same schedule or without some kind of protection of your immune system. It's really it's simple. I mean, it seems simple to me. It's not rocket science.
We have a request from one of our audience members that you all send your books to Bill Gates. Thank you, everyone, and thank you all of our authors for traveling to be here today.